Hey guys, welcome to week 8 of distance learning. I can't believe it. We're already in our 8th week. We only have 4 weeks left of school until you guys are 7th graders, so let's make it a really good, positive 4 weeks. That being said, when I say positive 4 weeks, when I ask you to do assignments, I expect complete sentences, proper capitalization, good punctuation. You know what I'm talking about, so please make sure that we're still continuing to do our high quality work and make sure that your work now is looking more like a 7th grade level work than a 5th grade level work, because we are officially in the home stretch and you guys are about to graduate on to the next grade. So make sure that you're keeping up high quality work. Congratulations to my first period. You guys officially have the highest average for this 6 weeks across all of my classes. So I know, just trying to put a little friendly competition in there and see if you guys can maybe pick up the pace a little bit. 5th and 7th, I think you guys can do a little bit better than you did. So thank you to everyone that reached out for Teacher Appreciation Week. Honestly, I feel like I should be thanking you guys. I don't say this every year. I've only ever said this to you guys, but this is honestly the best year of teaching I've ever had. Even though I lost you guys in the classroom for the last 2 months of school, I still honestly, this has been such a refreshing year. You guys are so unique and funny and positive, and honestly made it a joy to come into work every day, even with all the weird stuff that happened when we were in the portables, with the fire drills and, you know, the rat that lived in the ceiling for a little bit. So that was kind of exciting. But this has been the best year of teaching of my life. So I just am so grateful to have been able to teach you guys. And I honestly am super excited that I still get you guys for 4 more weeks. So your work for this week, super simple. I am so sorry about the novel discussion groups that I tried to set up last week. I didn't realize it would post for all of you guys, that you would have missing work if you didn't turn in the other group. So basically, this week, this is what your work is going to be. You'll do a quick write, number 1. Number 2, you'll answer a question in the Google Slides pertaining to the chapters of the novel that you have read this week, and those are going to be highlighted in the slide as always. And then number 3, I'm going to have one discussion question for the whole class. No matter what novel you're reading, you're going to post a response to it, and then you're going to reply to one of your classmates' responses as well. The specific directions for that are going to be in your Google Slides as always, but hopefully this will make it so that it's not as confusing as last week. So I am so sorry about that. That is my fault, 100%. That being said, just to kind of minimize the confusion, after I grade what you submitted for last week with the all the different discussion groups, I'm actually going to delete those assignments from Google Classroom so they're not in there kind of clogging up our novel discussions and you don't get confused and click on the wrong one. So if you did not do it for some reason, some random reason, I'm just going to give you a 70 for that part of the assignment and move on. So you'll have a passing grade in there instead of a missing, but I just don't even want to worry about it anymore, okay? I think that is it in terms of the work update. As all of you guys know, the grades are officially counting again. So I have 2 people total that have not been able to log in and do your work. And I have about 5 people that have not yet completed the work for this past week. So again, if I notice that you guys are having any trouble, I will call home. You can expect that I will be on the phone with your parents or emailing or trying to make some kind of contact. Because this, honestly, guys, like this is not the 6 weeks that you should fail. This is the 6 weeks where you have your own time to do the work. So hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier. I did want to share with you guys the one book that I read this week that I finished, because I haven't finished the other book yet that I showed you guys last week. My mom actually sent me this book for Teacher Appreciation Week. It's really cool. It's kind of by Dr. Seuss, and it's called Hooray for Diffin' Doofer Day, and it's about a teacher named Miss Bonkers. So, okay. But it's based on, after Dr. Seuss, the author, died, they found all these drawings of his that were like a rough draft of like a children's book, but he never finished it. Like, it's really cool, and they have all the like little notations by him and stuff. So anyway, these 2 authors, Jack Prelutsky and Lane Smith, they actually went through and made their own version of what he originally had started. So they kind of finished a Dr. Seuss book for him. And in the back it says they think this was the prequel to Oh, the Places You'll Go, which is like a commonly given graduation book present. So I thought that was really neat. I might read it to you guys towards the end of our time together. Maybe I need to figure out a way that it's not backwards so you guys can kind of read it with me. But anyway, just wanted to share that. I hope you guys have had an amazing week. Oh, there is one thing. So I had a couple students ask if they could like get me anything for Teacher Appreciation Week. And to be honest with you guys, what I really, really, really want more than anything, aside from all of you guys doing your work, is I would really, really like music suggestions of things I can listen to while I grade, because pretty much all I do now is on my computer. I'm just typing comments to you guys. So if you could tell me like a cool band or maybe a couple songs that you like that are kind of motivational and upbeat, I would love that, because it would get me through grading every week, and also make me think of you guys. So anyway, miss you, love you, hope you're well, and I'm gonna start reading the novel in just a second. Oh, actually, I keep telling you guys you're gonna meet the dog, so I'm gonna go get the dog and then I'll read the novel. All right, you guys, take care. Have an awesome week. All right, guys, so here's my dog. This is Jove. He didn't want to come upstairs because this is the room that's attached to where we have the bathtub, and he's scared of baths. So he thought he was gonna get a bath, so I had to bribe him upstairs with cheese. But he says hello, and he hopes you guys don't have any trouble doing your work this week, and I also hope the same. All right, here's the novel. I'll give him some more cheese. I actually found this dog at the last school that I worked at. He came up to the front door and he was eating trash outside the school, so I brought him home. So, Isabel, somewhere between the Bahamas and Florida, 1994, 5 days from home. Isabel slipped over the side of the boat into the sea and sighed. The water was warm, but it felt much cooler than being in the boat. The sun was just setting on the western horizon, turning the world into a sepia-toned photograph, but it still had to be close to 100 degrees outside. If it wouldn't have swamped their boat and drowned them all for good, Isabel would have prayed for rain to break the muggy heat. Isabel's father had rigged up a makeshift sunshade out of his shirt for her mother, and she seemed better now. The aspirin had kept Mommy's fever down, and though she was still exhausted and near to bursting with Isabel's baby brother, she seemed at peace somehow. Hot, but at peace. If the rest of them wanted relief, they had to wait for their turn in the water. Again, Isabel thought about their journey as a song. If the riots and trading for the gasoline were the first verse, and the tanker and the storm the second verse, this part of their trip, the long, hot, stagnant day and a half they had been traveling from the Bahamas to Florida, this was the bridge, a third verse that was different from the others. This verse was death by slow measures. This was the down-tempo lull before the coming excitement of the climactic last verse and coda. This was limbo. They could do nothing but wait. The last sliver of sun finally disappeared below the waves, and Louise cut the engine. The world went silent but for the soft lapping of water against the hull and the creak of their disintegrating boat. That's it, Louise said. With the sun down, we won't be able to navigate as well. Can't we use the stars? Isabel asked. She remembered reading that sailors had used the stars to navigate for centuries. Which one? Louise asked. None of them knew. Amara lifted one of the gasoline jugs and swished around what little there was left in it. Saves us gas anyway, she said. The thing's been eating it up. We'll be lucky to have enough to get to shore when we see land. When will we get there? Yvonne asked. He was bobbing in the water just ahead of Isabel, hanging onto the hull like she was. Tomorrow, hopefully, Senor Castillo said from inside the boat. It was the same thing he'd said yesterday and the day before that. Mañana, Isabel's grandfather whispered. He was treading water on the other side of the boat with Senor Castillo, his head just visible over the side. He'd been whispering that word on and off since yesterday, still seemed shaken up somehow. Isabel didn't know why. We'll see the lights of Miami sometime tomorrow, and we'll head straight for it, Mommy said. She shifted and winced uncomfortably. What is it? Are you all right? Papi asked. Isabel's mother put a hand on her belly. I think it's begun. What's begun? Papi asked. Then his eyes went wide. You mean the baby's coming? Here? Now? Everyone in the boat perked up, and Isabel and Yvonne pulled themselves up on the side of the boat to see. Isabel was a jumble of emotions. She was excited to see her brother born after waiting so long, but suddenly she was also afraid. Afraid for her mother to have the baby here on this fragile raft in the middle of the ocean, and worried, too, for the first time about how her baby brother would change her fragile family. Yes, I think I've gone into labor, Isabel's mother said calmly. But no, I am not having the baby here now. The contractions are just starting. It took Isabel another 10 hours to come after my contractions began, remember? Isabel had never heard her mother talk about her birth before, and she was both curious and a little weirded out at the same time. What are you going to name him, Yvonne asked. Mommy and Papi looked at each other. We haven't decided yet, she said. Well, I have some good ideas if you want some, Yvonne said. We're not naming him after Industriales players, Isabel told him, and Yvonne stuck his tongue out at her. They were all quiet for a time, and Isabel watched as the golden horizon shifted from orange to purple to deep blue. Would her baby brother be born at sea or in the United States? Would the end of their song really be a new life in Miami? Or would it end in tragedy for all of them, adrift out of gas and dying of thirst in the great saltwater desert out of the Atlantic? Hey, we never named our boat, Yvonne said. Everyone moaned and laughed. What, Yvonne said, smiling. Every good boat needs a name. I think we all agree this isn't a good boat, Senor Castillo said. But it's the boat that's taking us to the States, to freedom, Yvonne said. It deserves a name. How about Fidel, Luis joked, kicking up a splash on Castro's face at the bottom of the boat. No, Papi said. El ataúd flotante. The floating coffin? Isabel winced at the name. It wasn't funny. Not with her mother about to have a baby on the boat. Too close, Senor Castillo agreed. How about me piro, he suggested. It was slang for I'm out of here in Cuba. Ciao pescado, Mommy said, and everyone laughed. It literally meant goodbye fish, but everyone in Cuba said it to each other to say goodbye. The St. Louis, Isabel's grandfather said softly. Everyone was quiet for a moment, trying to figure out the joke, but no one understood. Hey, but you guys, my class, you understand, because you know Joseph's story. Make the connection. How about El Camello, Luis said. The camel was what they called the ugly humpbacked buses pulled around by tractors in Havana. No, I've got it, Amara cried. El Botero. It was perfect because it was the slang word for the taxis in Havana, but it actually meant the boatman. All the adults laughed and clapped. No, Yvonne said, frustrated. It needs a cool-sounding name like the... Yvonne jumped a little in the water and his eyes went wide. The what? Isabel asked. Then she jumped too as something hard and leathery bumped into her leg. Shark! Screamed Isabel's grandfather from the other side of the boat. Shark! The water around Yvonne became a dark red cloud, and Isabel screamed. Something bumped into her again, and Isabel scrambled to climb into the boat, arms and legs shaking, panic thundering in her chest. Her father grabbed her around her middle, and they fell back in a tumble inside the boat. Beside them, Amara and Mommy helped pull Senora Castillo into the boat as Lito pushed her up out of the water from behind. Isabel and her father scrabbled to their knees and pulled her grandfather in beside her. On the other side of the boat, Luis and Senor Castillo cried out Yvonne's name as they hauled his limp body over the side. Yvonne's right leg was a bloody mess. There were small bites all over it as though a gang of sharks had attacked all at once. Raw, red, gaping wounds exposed the muscle underneath his skin. Isabel fell back against the side of the boat in horror. She'd never seen anything so awful. She felt like she was going to throw up. Senor Castillo wailed. Yvonne was so shocked he didn't even cry out, didn't speak. His eyes had a glazed look to them, and his mouth hung open. One of the gashes up near his thigh was pumping blood out like a garden hose, and Isabel watched as Yvonne's face grew pale. She couldn't speak. A tourniquet, Lito cried. We have to get something around his leg to stop the bleeding. Isabel's father yanked off his belt, and Lito tied it as high around Yvonne's leg as he could, but the blood still flowed, coloring the water all around them in the boat a dark, sickening red. No, Senor Castillo cried as the life went out of Yvonne's eyes. Isabel wanted to scream too, but she was frozen. There was nothing she could do. There was nothing any of them could do. Yvonne was dead. Luis yelled in rage and pulled his police pistol from its holster. Bang, bang, bang. He fired once, twice, 3 times at the fin that circled the boat. No, Lito said, grabbing Luis's hand before he could shoot again. You'll just bring more sharks with the blood in the water. Too late. Another fin appeared, and another, and soon the nameless little boat was surrounded. They were trapped in their own sinking prison. Mahmoud, Lesbos, Greece to Athens, Greece, 2015, 12 days from home. Mahmoud was in another tent city. The paved parking lot at the pier in Lesbos was full of the kinds of camping tents sold in sporting goods stores. Round-top single-family tents of blue and green and white and yellow and red, all provided by Greek relief workers who knew the refugees had nowhere to stay while they waited for the ferry to Athens to come. Wet clothes were hung out to dry on bicycle racks and traffic signs, and refugees gathered around camp stoves and hot plates. Should have been a lively place, full of songs and laughter like the Kilis refugee camp, but instead a soft, mournful murmur of conversation hung over the tent city like a fog. Mahmoud wasn't surprised. His family felt exactly the same way. They all should have been excited to finally be in Greece, to be allowed to buy real tickets to travel on an actual ferry to mainland Europe. But too many of them had lost someone in the sea crossing to be happy. Mahmoud's mother had gone from tent to tent asking after Hana. Mahmoud had helped. It was his fault she was gone after all. But no one at the dock had her, and no one had been on the dinghy that had taken her. Refugees came and went, but the tents remained, and Mahmoud's mother insisted they miss the next ferry to Athens so she could ask each new round of refugees for word of her daughter. But no one knew anything about her. Mahmoud felt as sick as he had on the dinghy. He couldn't look at his mother. She had to blame him for losing Hana. He certainly blamed himself. He couldn't sleep at night. He kept picturing his sister's dinghy bursting on the rocks, Hana falling into the water, none of them there to help her. Mahmoud's mother wanted to stay at the dock longer, didn't want to leave without knowing what happened to Hana, but Dad told her they had to move on. There was no telling when the ferry line might suddenly decide to stop selling tickets to refugees or when Greece might decide to send them all home. They had to keep moving or they would die. Hana had to have gone ahead of them on the morning ferry they'd missed that first day. Or else. But nobody wanted to think about the or else. The huge Athens ferry arrived again that morning. It was the length of a soccer field and at least 5 stories tall. The bottom half of it was painted blue, and Blue Star Ferries was written in big words on the side. A radar bar spun near the bridge, and antennas and satellite dishes sprouted from the roof. It looked like the pictures Mahmoud had seen of cruise ships. Its lifeboats alone were bigger than the dinghy they had left Turkey in. Mahmoud tried to get Walid interested in the big ship to get him excited about their first trip on a boat that big, but his little brother didn't care. He didn't seem to care about anything. Big ramp on the back lowered, and refugees streamed on board the ferry. Mahmoud's mother wept as they climbed a ramp with the other passengers. She kept looking back over her shoulder at the tent city, hoping Mahmoud was sure to catch a glimpse of someone carrying a baby who might be Hana. But she never did. The inside of the ferry was like the lobby of a fancy hotel. Every floor had little clusters of glass tables and white upholstered chairs. Snack bars sold chips and sweets and sodas, and televisions played a Greek soccer game. Refugees who still had belongings stuffed their backpacks and trash bags under tables and into the overhead compartments. Mahmoud and his family settled into one of the booths, and his father searched for a plug to charge his phone. "Mahmoud, why don't you take your brother and explore the ship?" Dad said. Mahmoud was only too glad to get away from the sight of his mother's broken face, and he took Walid by the hand and pulled him out onto the promenade that ran around the outside of the ship. Mahmoud and Walid watched silently as the ferry pulled away from the dock and the ship's huge engines thrumming deep underneath them. The awful sea that had tried to swallow them was calm and sapphire blue now. The Greek island of Lesbos was actually beautiful when you saw it from the sea. Little white buildings with terracotta roofs rose up tree-covered hills, and on top of one of the hills was an ancient gray castle. Mahmoud could see why people visited there on vacation. Besides the refugees, there were a number of tourists on board. Mahmoud could tell they weren't refugees because they wore clean clothes and used their phones for taking pictures instead of looking up overland routes from Athens to Macedonia. Another refugee had laid out a mat on the deck, and he was praying. In all the bustle of waiting in line and getting on board, Mahmoud had lost track of what time it was, and he pulled his brother down with him to pray alongside the man. As he kneeled and stood, Mahmoud was supposed to be focused only on his prayers. But he couldn't help but notice the uneasy looks the tourists were giving him, the frowns of displeasure, like Mahmoud and his brother and this man were doing something wrong. The vacationers dropped their voices, and even though Mahmoud couldn't understand what they were saying, he could hear the disgust in their words. This wasn't what the tourists had paid for. They were supposed to be on holiday, seeing ancient ruins and beautiful Greek beaches, not stepping over filthy, praying refugees. They only see us when we do something they don't want us to do, Mahmoud realized. The thought hit him like a lightning bolt. When they stayed where they were supposed to be, in the ruins of Aleppo or behind the fences of a refugee camp, people could forget about them. But when refugees did something they didn't want them to do, when they tried to cross the border into their country, or slept on the front stoops of their shops, or jumped in front of their cars, or prayed on the decks of their ferries, that's when people couldn't ignore them any longer. Mahmoud's first instinct was to disappear below decks, to be invisible. Being invisible in Syria had kept him alive. But now Mahmoud began to wonder if being invisible in Europe might be the death of him and his family. If no one saw them, no one could help them. And maybe the world needed to see what was really happening here. It was hard not to see the refugees in Athens when Mahmoud got there. Syrians were everywhere in the streets and hotels and markets, most of them, like Mahmoud's family, planning to move on as soon as they could. Mahmoud's father thought he had the right documents to travel freely in Greece, but a woman in an immigration office told him he would need to go to a local police station first to get an official document, and the police told him he would have to wait up to a week. "We can't wait a week," Mahmoud's father told his family. They had found a hotel for €10 a night per person, and the people of Athens were very friendly and helpful. But Mahmoud knew his parents only had so much money, and they still had 4 more countries to cross before they reached Germany. Mahmoud's mother would have stayed a week or even longer to keep asking everyone she met if they had seen a baby named Hannah. But it was decided. They would take a train to the border of Macedonia and try to sneak across during the night. Joseph, just outside Havana Harbor, 1939, 21 days from home. Joseph watched from the deck as another little boat snuck through the flotilla of reporters and fruit sellers and Cuban policemen surrounding the MS St. Louis. This boat held a familiar-looking passenger, and Joseph realized with a start that it was Dr. Aber, Renata and Evelyn's father, who already lived in Cuba. Joseph ran through the ship until he found the sisters in the movie theater watching serials. "Your dad's coming to the ship," Joseph told them. Renata and Evelyn hurried after him. When they got back to the ladder at sea deck, they got an even bigger surprise. Dr. Aber had gotten on board the St. Louis. Officer Padron was looking over some papers Dr. Aber had brought with him, and a small crowd had gathered to see what was happening. Renata and Evelyn ran to their father, and he swept them up in his arms. "My beautiful daughters," he said, kissing them both. "I thought I'd never see you again." Officer Padron nodded and said something in Spanish to Dr. Aber, and Dr. Aber smiled at his daughters. "Come, it's time for you to join me in Cuba." "But what about our things, our clothes?" Renata asked. "Forget about them. We'll buy you new clothes in Cuba," Dr. Aber said. His eyes darted to the policeman, and Joseph understood. Somehow, Dr. Aber had gotten someone official to let him come get his daughters off the ship, but he didn't want to wait around any longer in case the policemen changed their minds. He carried Renata and Evelyn to the ladder, and Renata barely had time to yell "goodbye" to Joseph and wave before they were gone over the side. Joseph was speechless, but the rest of the crowd wasn't. Angry passengers surrounded Officer Padron and the other policemen, demanding answers. "How come they get off the ship and not us? Can you help us? How'd they do it? Let us off the ship. My husband is in Cuba." "They have papers, right? Papers," Officer Padron tried to explain in broken German, but that only made the crowd madder. "We have papers, visas. We paid for them." Joseph was scared for Officer Padron, but he shared the passengers' frustration. Why had Dr. Aber been able to take Renata and Evelyn off and none of the rest of them could go? It wasn't fair. Joseph clenched his fists and began to shake. Then he realized it wasn't him that was doing the shaking. It was the metal deck of the ship. The ship's engines were rumbling to life for the first time since they had dropped the anchor, which could mean only one thing. The St. Louis was going home to Germany, and they were all going with it. Without a word from anyone, the passengers rushed to the top of the ladder at once. Officer Padron drew his pistol, and Joseph gasped. "Pardon!" the police officer cried. "Halt!" He swept the gun back and forth, and the other policemen drew their pistols and did the same. The angry passengers pulled back but didn't run away. Joseph's heart was in his throat. Any second now the mob was going to attack the policemen, Joseph knew it. They would rather die than be sent back to Germany, back to Hitler. The ship's first officer and the purser arrived and threw themselves in between the guards and the angry crowd. They begged for everyone to remain calm, but no one listened. As the vibrations of the ship's engines below grew louder and more insistent, more people rushed to the ladder to demand to be let off the ship. Joseph was caught in the middle now. If the mob pushed forward into the guns of the policemen, Joseph would have no choice but to push with them. It was hot, well over 100 degrees on deck already, and the temperature of the crowd was rising. Joseph was a ball of sweat, and the close-packed mob only made things worse. The situation was just about to boil over when a small white man in a gray suit climbed up the ladder behind the policeman. It was Captain Schroeder. But Joseph wondered why was he out of uniform, and why had he been off the ship. For a moment, the mob was so surprised it stopped surging forward. Captain Schroeder was surprised too. As soon as he saw the angry crowd and the guns drawn, he lost his temper. He yelled at the policemen to lower their weapons or he would order them off the ship, and at last they obeyed. "Why have the engines started?" one of the passengers yelled. "Tell us what's happening." Captain Schroeder put his hands in the air and called for calm so that he could explain. He took off his hat and mopped his brow with his handkerchief. "I have just been to see President Brue to appeal to him personally for you to be allowed to disembark," the captain said. But he would not see me. There were dark mutterings among the passengers, and Joseph felt himself getting angrier. What was going on? Why had the Cubans promised the passengers they would let them in, only to turn them away? Worse, Captain Schroeder said, "The Cuban government has ordered us to leave the harbor by tomorrow morning." Leave by tomorrow? Joseph thought, and go where? What about his father? Would he be leaving with them? Cries of anger came from the passengers, and Joseph joined in. The first officer had disappeared briefly, but now returned with more sailors, in case there was violence. Joseph wondered if he should bring his mother to hear this news, but he knew she was in their cabin, most likely in bed, crying. She blamed herself for her husband's suicide attempt, and in the last 2 days she'd become, in a way, as absent a parent as Joseph's father. No, Joseph was the one who needed to be here right now, for his mother and for Ruthie. Captain Schroeder called for quiet again. "We are not going home. We will cruise the American coast and make appeals to President Roosevelt. If any of you have friends or families in the States, I beg you to ask them to exert what influence they can. No matter what, I assure you, I will do everything in my power to arrange a landing outside Germany. Hope must always remain calm. Now please go back to your cabins. I must return to the bridge to make the ship ready for departure. The crowd mobbed the captain as he tried to leave sea deck, but the passengers pushing and shoving their way around Joseph. Joseph fought his way out to the passenger who had translated for Officer Padron the other day and pulled him to where the policeman stood. What about my father? Joseph asked Officer Padron through the translator. I saw him in the hospital, the policeman told Joseph. He's not well enough to come to the ship. Then can we go to him instead? Joseph asked. The policeman looked pained. I'm sorry, little man, you cannot leave the ship. But the ship is leaving, Joseph said. He could feel the pulsing engines under his feet. We can't leave my father behind. I wish from the bottom of my heart that you will land soon, little man, Officer Padron said again. I'm sorry, I'm just doing my job. Joseph looked deep into Officer Padron's eyes, searching for some sign of help, some hint of sympathy. Officer Padron just looked away. Joseph was still standing there in the hot Cuban sun when, right before lunch, the policeman left on a launch. Officer Padron still wouldn't look at him. Once the little boat was clear, the MS St. Louis blew its horn, raised its anchor, and left Havana Harbor, destination unknown. As he stood at the rail with the rest of the passengers, saying a tearful goodbye to the only place that had ever promised them refuge, Joseph said goodbye to his father as well. He took his shirt collar in both hands and ripped it along the seam, rending his garment as he'd done when Professor Weiler had been buried at sea. Joseph knew Papa was still alive, but it didn't matter. His father was dead to his family, and so, Joseph realized, was their dream of joining him in Cuba.